A good place to start looking at the Romantic movement in the visual arts is at the top of page 98 in your textbooks, figure 15.1 on page 98, the French romantic artist Géricault and the Raft of the Medusa. The artist's name here is Géricault. He's French, so his name isn't pronounced the way that English readers want to pronounce it. Looks like Géricault to English readers, but pronounced Géricault. Géricault's Raft of the Medusa. What I'm going to be doing with several paintings and going through the Romantic movement is I'll be telling you the story, what's going on in the painting, and then as I do that I want you to think back to the characteristics of Romanticism that we talked about in the first presentation on the Romantic era. Those major characteristics, emphasis on emotion, especially negative emotion like pain, suffering, depression, alienation. An emphasis on nature, especially the power of nature, the destructive power of nature, the bigness of nature, and social and political commentary. Be thinking along the lines, as I tell you the story, be thinking, what makes this a romantic painting? What are the characteristics of Romanticism here? Well, the Raft of the Medusa. The Medusa was a sailing ship, a French sailing ship. This is a true story, by the way, which set sail in 1816 or 1817, around in there, set sail for West Africa. The captain of the ship had been appointed a captain by the French government as a political payoff, even though the captain hadn't been on a boat in 20 years or so, but he was given the job of being captain as a political payoff. The captain chose one of the passengers on the ship to be his navigator, simply because that passenger had a bachelor's degree in mathematics, so for whatever reason the captain thought that this would qualify him to be a navigator. The ship lost the convoy that it was in, began wandering aimlessly across the ocean just off the coast of West Africa, just off the coast of where Mauritania is today. The green on the map indicates where that nation is. There's a string of sandbars that lie about 30 miles off the coast of West Africa, out in the middle of the ocean, about 30 miles off the coast. You don't expect to find sandbars. I've got a photograph of one of them here. Awful pretty picture, but kind of dangerous out in the middle of the ocean. This ship's captain and this navigator made several different errors in navigation, ended up in the middle of these sandbars, ignoring warnings from more experienced crew members that things weren't looking very well. The water was muddy and all kinds of signs that this is not a good place to be. The ship ran aground on a sandbar. The captain decided to take the ship apart to build a raft. The idea was that the passengers would get either into the longboats on the ship, the life rafts, I guess we call them today, as many as could fit on the boats, the rowing boats, and then they'd build a raft to carry along the rest of the crew. The raft ended up being, you see on the screen a diagram of it, about 60 feet long, about 25 feet wide. The idea was to carry about 150, 160 passengers on the raft. The rest would load up into the rowboats. They would tie the raft to the rowboats and then pull the raft 30 miles or so to shore. The captain, who gets into his lifeboat, begins pulling the raft away from the boat. 17 men decided to stay on the ship. They figured they were better off on the ship than on this raft with this crazy captain pulling them around. But the passengers, almost 400 passengers, got either into the lifeboats or onto the raft. The captain, who was not only completely incompetent but a coward, decided that it was taking too long pulling the raft, and to get to safety, cut his lifeboat loose and began going to shore. The other lifeboats did the same, abandoning about 160 passengers on this raft. They'd be on the raft for 13 days floating around before somebody happened upon them, picked them up. They very quickly run out of food. They weren't prepared for a 2-week float out on the raft. They very quickly run out of food, resort to cannibalism. It's one of those horrible cannibal stories that comes up occasionally. Eventually, after 13 days, 15 passengers had survived. Of the 160 or so who got onto the raft, 5 of them later died from their condition. So totally only 10 survived from the raft. Eventually, this captain got home and thought about those men he'd left behind on the ship itself, and 54 days later sent somebody out to get them. Only 3 of those 17 had survived. The captain was tried for incompetency, for leaving the boat with passengers without, well, I want to say, leaving the boat, abandoning the ship without taking along all the passengers, some other charges. He was found guilty. Those penalties, especially the one of abandoning a ship with passengers on board, carried the death penalty in France, but he got 3 years in prison, and that was later reduced even further by the government. Well, here you have a good introduction to Romanticism. You've got all the major elements of Romanticism. You've got the bigness of nature, the big storm clouds up in the sky. Look at the amount of canvas devoted over to the sky, the big storm clouds, the big waves. These people are in trouble. You have the negative emotion, all the different suffering on board the raft here. This image here of depression, a man who's completely given up, completely alienated himself off from whatever else is going up on the ship, on the raft here. You may notice he has a red cloak, a piece of cloth laying across the back of his head and his neck and his back. Of course, that would be to keep the sun off, but it also symbolizes here how he's isolated himself from the rest of the crowd, completely given up, completely apathetic. And then you have the political commentary, the political corruption that gets this incompetent captain his job in the first place, and then what was seen by a lot of people as the cover-up at the end, or at least a whitewash of what had happened. So you see that it fits very well into the Romantic movement, and also that, you learn pretty quickly that word romantic doesn't mean here falling in love kind of romantic. You can think about the painting as being made up of 2 different triangles. Back here you have a dark triangle, back here, and then you have a brighter triangle that starts up here and opens up this way. That triangle. This triangle down here, the action is moving us in this direction. These people are all excited about something. And if you bisect this leg of the triangle and you look very carefully, you see what it is they're interested in. You had to look very carefully, but there on the horizon is a ship. These are desperate people. They see the ship on the horizon, they pile up on top of each other, start waving, doing anything to get somebody's attention on board that ship. That ship sailed off and then returned and picked them up. That's the French ship, the Argus, which made the return, which returned to pick up the raft. So that's what everybody's excited about. They're all everybody's waving the flag, waving the shirts, doing anything to get attention, except for this figure here, who's completely given up, completely turned his back on the whole scene there, as he holds his dead friend, or his lunch, or whatever, I don't know. Well, anyway, there you see a painting which fits very well into the Romantic movement. It's got all 3 major characteristics of Romanticism.